to Our Last Meal, the podcast on grief, loss, and food. I'm your host, Andrew, and every episode I talk with a guest about someone important in their life, someone they've lost, and what role food played in their relationship. This week I talk with Coach Paula, a woman with an incredible story about love and grief. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this is one of my favorite interviews that I've done so far. That's not a knock on anyone else I've spoken to. Paula was just that incredible. I hope you will listen. I hope you will enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, I hope you'll take the time to tell a friend or a family member about the show. Leave a rating or review on whatever podcast service you use. Follow on social media at Our Last Meal Pod. All that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. I do like to give a content warning at the top. This show does talk about death, so just please be mindful as you listen. Hello and welcome to Our Last Meal. I'm your host, Andrew, and my guest this week is Coach Paula, a grief, relationship, and empowerment specialist. Paula, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
I really appreciate you taking the time. This is full transparency. This is Super Bowl Sunday. It's a couple hours before the game. And I know you said that you live close to Philadelphia, so I can only imagine the insanity that is just encapsulating everything around you right now.
Absolutely. Go Eagles.
I think I'm pulling for the Chiefs over the Eagles. I'm also just pulling
Sorry
for
your loss.
I just want a fun game. I want it to be competitive and also for good food. You know, we were talking
Indeed.
just before we started that I'm going to try to represent both teams in the menu tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. Do you have anything special planned in terms of the game?
No, I plan to just watch here on my couch and try to see how my friends react when the victory occurs.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd heard that the city of Philadelphia they have to grease light poles to keep
Oh,
people from
yes.
climbing them. Is that an accurate thing?
That is very accurate. You've heard correctly. Yes.
I guess the reason that shocks me is I'm a Carolina Panthers fan. I haven't had a chance to really celebrate in several years now.
Okay.
So maybe we're not used to that much excitement.
Yeah, Philly goes all out.
Yeah.
They're party town.
It is that I have a friend that lives in Pennsylvania. I think he's on the western side of the state, but I'm not 100% sure.
I don't think they get much celebration over there.
It is a goal of mine to make it up to Pennsylvania. I really do want to go to Philadelphia, though. I would like to check out the city. I mean, there's so much history there, and
There is. It's a great city to visit, and make sure you get a cheesesteak while you're here.
well, yeah,
And a pretzel.
are the pretzels a big thing there?
Oh, yes. Philly pretzels are everything.
Okay, I've got to
Absolutely.
ask this now. Tell me about a Philly pretzel.
Okay, so, it's not like a pretzel that you get in a snack bag. It's pretzel that's like a bread, and it's a twisted pretzel. And it has salt. It's topped with salt, and you dip it in mustard. Sometimes people use it as even breading for, a sandwich or something like that. But it's like bread.
So
It's
just
like
like a big soft pretzel.
a big soft pretzel. It's not like a hard crunchy pretzel. It's
Yeah.
a big soft breaded pretzel. And when you get it warm, oh my goodness.
Now I've had the soft pretzels before. I didn't know that was a big thing for Philly though. I do
Yes.
love it with mustard, or with like beer cheese.
Hmm.
The mustard though, is it like a yellow mustard, like a
Yellow
stone
mustard
ground
is
mustard?
preferred, but some people do like to get the brown mustards.
Okay.
Some people like to get a sweet cream, all kinds of stuff.
No,
Yeah.
I could see that.
Like at that famous pretzel lady place. I don't want to say the name. How they have the
Yeah, I know what
sweet
you're talking
cream.
about. Yeah, I they have we'll see those in the mall down here, and
Hmm.
I'm of the three people in my house, my daughter does not like pretzels. My wife is kind of ambivalent. It's a if it's there, if she's peckish, pretzels fine. I love
Okay.
pretzels. I will keep I'll keep bags of the pretzel chips in the house. if I go to a
Nice.
restaurant and they've got an appetizer of like the big soft pretzel with the
Hmm.
coarse salt on it, like you were saying, and the mustard
Yep.
to dip it in or the cheese, I am all for that. So
Yep.
one more
Philly's a
reason to go to
foodie
Philly.
town, so come to Philly. You'll have a great time.
I always like talking to people from different places because and I've covered multiple continents now with the show, both coasts of the United States and all kinds of major cities. And I'm always learning about unique food for these places that I'm gonna have to try. So I'm gonna have to add
Hmm.
the big soft pretzel to the list for Philly.
Absolutely.
I love it. So I appreciate you joining today. We talked a little bit beforehand. Uh, you have a story that you wanted to tell that you wanted to come on and talk about. I know you shared with me that you've experienced a lot of loss, but I don't want to speak for you. You want to go and tell me, who we're going to talk about today, and why was this person so special to you?
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about Martin Hollis, also known as my captain. He called himself my captain when we got married over 30 years ago. And he passed away suddenly on Wednesday, November the 24th of 2021, one day before Thanksgiving. And he
Yeah,
was slated to retire at the end of that year after working for 34 years for the U.S. Postal Service. And so we were really looking forward to his retirement and just enjoying that time together. But unfortunately, he passed away right before Thanksgiving. And so it was actually 6 days after my sister had passed away as well. So
hmm,
November of 2021 was definitely full of grief and just a lot of sorrow. But we've been navigating and managing the grief ever since. A huge loss for our family. My husband was the youngest of 11 siblings, and he has a twin sister as well. And so this is the first time that their family immediate circle has been unbroken amongst the siblings. And so no one ever thought that the baby of the family would be the one to go first. But even though he's no longer physically here, his presence is very strong amongst all of us. So,
yeah. We'll come to the story in a moment. You told me a beautiful story before we started talking.
hmm.
Um, I want to poke around a little bit about what you just said though. That's so much loss in such a short time in a week,
Yes,
and not just major losses too. A sibling and a spouse. You
yes,
know, I just have to ask, how were you able to manage and keep going? Because that is a lot of loss.
it is. It is a lot of loss. And overall, I've had a lot of loss in my family. I'm the youngest of seven, and five of my siblings have passed away. So I have one sibling left. And so I had already lost my four brothers. And so when my sister passed, that's the first time I have two sisters. That was the first time I had, a sister to pass away. And, my sister had collapsed about 10 days before she passed away. They found her unresponsive. And my husband, even though he was sick at the time because he had ruptured his Achilles, and he wasn't working. And so, literally, he would go to the hospital with me every day while we were waiting on my sister's neurological testing and outcomes and different things. And so it was, very painstaking. Like,
Uh,
he's on his crutches or on the scooter, trying to navigate him, trying to be there to support my sister and her six daughters, through this process and the different neurological testing. It was an awful lot. And then for my husband to pass away, I mean, for me, it was really, I have to say that my faith, I am a strong believer in my faith. And that definitely is something that rooted me and caused me to have a grounding. But then also just the love of my family, the love of my friends, and the support of so many people around me definitely sustained me in the extremely difficult time. Like I would not have been able to have survived it without the support of family and friends and my
yeah.
faith.
I think that trifecta for so many people is important. The family, the friends, the faith.
Yeah.
To find that thing that gives you that, I guess, that foundation. And just,
Absolutely.
and it's the other thing, you talk about family and friends, and it sounds like even for him, even until the end, he was that for so many other people as well. That
My
he was there
husband
for.
really was. He was a man of small stature, but he had a huge personality and a gigantic heart. Like
Yeah,
he always spoke positively of people. He always befriended people. He was a letter carrier. He worked for 34 years for the U.S. Postal Service. And some of the stories that some of the family shared with me after my husband passed away, I'm like, well, when did he work? Like he was shooting basketball with the kids and teaching them, how to do their jump shots and foul shots. He was helping one elderly lady. She explained to me how my husband had helped her when she had her hip replacement to walk from her front door to the driveway to retrieve her mail because she needed to walk, but she didn't feel comfortable walking unaided.
yeah,
And I'm just hearing these stories of the things that this man did and how he met people in the Wawa and, just shared with them. And even at his funeral service, my nephew said that my husband always had a kind word to say about everyone. And he's like, he would even say something nice about like the devil. And everyone in the audience is like, what? What would he say nice about the devil? And my nephew's like, well, Uncle Martin would say, well, he is consistent.
so you mentioned how you heard all these stories about him, about helping people and just all this kindness. Were these things that you'd heard beforehand, or are these things that came out after the fact?
Sort of a combination. I mean, my husband would always tell me about things he did at work and, people he encountered and different things like that. But it just seemed like there was such a flood of it, of course, after he passed away because people were sharing
Yeah,
about him. And it's actually kind of funny if I could tell a story about when my son was probably my oldest son, excuse me, was probably about 6 months old. And at the time, my husband and I were sharing one car, and I was driving out to pick him up from work. And the car started having trouble, and I didn't feel comfortable, proceeding. And so I pulled into this little parking lot. There was a little mom and pop, little store. And I called my husband and I said, babe, something's wrong with the car. I don't feel comfortable, moving forward. I explained to him where I was, and he said, okay, let me get someone to drive me there. And so my son was getting a little restless in the car. So I said, well, let me get out and take him in the store. I can always shop anywhere. And so I go into the little mom and pop store, and I'm in an area I'm completely unfamiliar with. And I'm walking around the store, going through the different aisles, and I notice that the store owners keep watching me from aisle to aisle. And, we live in a, a society that is not unifying as far as the races are concerned.
yeah,
And so I'm like, am I being profiled? I was getting a little uncomfortable as I went from aisle to aisle, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. And I picked up a few items, and then finally I looked at the woman and I said, excuse me, is there a problem? Like, I just, it made me feel uncomfortable
yeah.
how she kept watching me. And she said, oh, no, no, I'm sorry. She's like, I just keep looking at your baby. And I'm like, my baby, and she's like, I'm sorry. He just reminds me so much of our singing mailman. And she looks at her husband. She's like, "What's his name, honey?" The singing mailman. He's like, "Oh yeah, Marty." She's like, "Yeah, yeah, Marty, Marty, our singing mailman." And she's like, "Your baby just looks so much like Marty." And so I started laughing, and I realized like I'm about 10 minutes from my husband's job, so this is potentially one of his patrons. And I said, "Oh, I know you're singing mailman Marty." I'm like, is my husband and this is, his son. And they were like, "Oh my God, this is the baby." And it was like, I'm having this reunion with these people of sorts. And they're like, "Oh my God, you're his wife." And they're like, "Oh my goodness, we're all excited." And so they eventually took me to the back, and they're like, "Relax." I told them I had car trouble, and I was like, "Marty's on his way." And they're like, "Oh, what do you need?" So they filled up my bags. They gave me all this complimentary food and different things. And they're like, "Oh my God, it's Marty's wife." And they called their kids. I'm like, this is unreal.
It is. That's amazing.
Yeah. So when my husband got there, they're like, "Marty, he sings for us all the time. And we always give him a snack and different things." I'm like, it was the nature of my husband. Like that's just the type of person he was.
I love that. It goes to show. I mean, for him, it may have just been his nature just to be kind to people, but it just shows that
Yeah,
it makes an impact on people.
it really does. Kindness goes a long way. A smile, just a nice word. It really goes a long way. The small gestures truly have big impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It reminds me of that that quote of it. People may not always remember what you did or what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Remember how you feel.
And I know I'm
Absolutely.
paraphrasing, but I really think that's at the
Well,
spirit
you
of
did pretty well, Andrew.
that. But I mean, it's so true though. It's small actions can really have a big impact,
They do.
and
They really do. And I think we too often lose sight of that and focus on the big things. Not that the big things aren't important as well, but there's so many small things that are simply overlooked and can have a huge impact. And
yeah,
so, yeah, my husband was very thoughtful like that. He was very intentional like that. And the simple things, cards, little notes. Like I would go to my car in the morning, there'd be a little note on the seat. Like that just meant a lot to me. And that he would take the time, or especially, sometimes we would get bad weather here in the Northeast. And so, my car, he would make sure that I knew where my snow scraper was, or just to make sure if my car was cleaned off, or made sure there was an umbrella in my car if it was going to rain that day. Just little things
yeah.
like that really make a difference. So,
That's beautiful. I think that's kind of the blueprint for every husband is to try to,
yeah.
and I guess maybe not just for every husband, for every person who has a spouse, try to. I don't know, it's the little things.
Yes, it is. It really is the little things.
I love that.
It goes a long way.
Speaking of stories, there was another one you told me before
Hmm.
we started, and would you mind telling that? Because this literally brought tears to my eyes just hearing you tell this.
Sure, I'll gladly tell that story. One of the things that I appreciated about my husband is that he was a very good father. And he had a wonderful father. He had a wonderful grandfather who raised him. And he really was a strong example of fatherhood. And so when our first son was born, he was around 6 years old. And my husband, said, "Hey, we need to have a family meeting with him." And I'm like, "Okay, what's the subject of the family meeting?" He said, "Well, we need to have the talk with him." And so if you're a boy mom, you hear the word the talk, you think it's the pubescent talk. And I'm like, "Well, he's 6." Like, what? He's like, "It's okay, babe. We're going to have the talk with him. It'll be fine." So I just decided to trust whatever my husband was doing. I mean, I'm a woman. I can't say I'm an expert at raising men. So I had to trust him. And so my son gets home from school, he gets situated, and then my husband's like, "All right, let's have the meeting." And we're sitting there, and so my husband starts off, "Hey son, I'm really so glad to be your dad. It's, one of my greatest life's accomplishments, and I'm really honored to be your dad, but I've never been a dad before, and you've never been a son before. So that means we're both doing something that we've never done, and that means we'll do some things really well, and other things we're going to make mistakes." And so my 6 year old was like, "Yeah, dad, and my husband said, through all of it, the good and the bad, as long as we are open and honest with each other and we don't keep secrets and we share and we talk everything out, there's nothing that we can't accomplish and nothing that we can't get done." And he's like, "Son, are you willing, to have that type of relationship and to talk to me and, to let us work through things together?" And of course, my son's like, "Yeah, dad, high five, dad,
Yeah, he's on
And
board.
so when the talk was over, I kind of like said, "Whew, that was good. I survived." We didn't talk about body parts or anything of that nature. But I thought it was a very endearing moment. And so fast forward, my second son, there's 8 years between my first and second. And so now my oldest is 14. We've already had that awkward talk. And now it's time for my second son to have the talk. And so I'm like, "Well, that was really cute 8 years ago, but how are you going to make this, special second time around?" And so my husband started with my younger son. He's like, "Son, I've never fathered two sons before, and you've never been a son before. And then he pointed to my older son, hey, you've never been a big brother before. And so he continued down that same line, and it made it personable to everyone, yet endearing. And I was like, whoa, kudos to you. That was great. And so then 5 years later, I have my youngest son, and my husband calls that same meeting again with him. He's around age 6, and he does the same thing. Starts with him as the younger, goes to my bridge son, which I don't call him my middle child, tells him you've never been a big brother, and then he goes to my oldest son, and he literally almost sort of passes a paternal baton to him in the sense that he now has two younger brothers that he needs to care for. And so as a result, my oldest son is very paternal. And, he would take my two younger sons on like brother dates. And, he was always very
Yeah.
fatherly toward them, like a junior dad. And so fast forward now, my husband passes away. And here we are in the hospital, and I'm standing there. I'm looking at my husband. I'm looking at my three sons who are now like nearly men, young men. And I'm like, how am I going to navigate this? I'm a single mom, and their dad's not here. I'm like, what do we do? And so I looked at my husband and I looked at my sons, and I thought back to those three conversations. And I said to my sons, guys, here we are. I've been married to your dad for 30 years. I married him at 21. I've never been a widow before. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is to live life without him, as my partner. I said, here you guys are. You've never lived a moment without your dad other than these moments now. And so here we are. We're all doing something that we've never, ever done before. I said, and my kids just started chiming in. One's like, yeah, we're going to do some things right. And then another son chimed in, yeah, we're going to do some things wrong. And then the third one's like, but yeah, if we work through it together. And like, we're all standing there like in tears because we realized my husband, with a very simple act from over 25 years prior, taught us how to live in this moment. And we realized that if we give each other grace and space, that there literally is nothing that we as a family cannot endure and overcome together.
I
Yeah.
I told you that made me tear up beforehand hearing it, and even the second time it makes me tear up because
Yeah. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about it as well, Andrew. But that, for real, that is the legacy of my husband. That is the type of person that he was. And I have stories like that for days because that's just the type of person that he was.
I mean, and it shows to me too the fact that all three of your children jumped on that so quickly.
Yeah.
You got them started, but they knew where to go. I mean that there's so
Yeah.
much of him that's still living on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I lived, it's funny. I said, yeah, I had one Martin that passed away, but I have four more with my three sons and my 4-year-old grandson because I literally feel like I'm looking and living still with my husband every day.
That's so. I have to ask. I mean, does that make it easier? And easy, I guess, is relative. It's
It
it's
is
a relative.
relative. It's bittersweet. I think that's the best way to describe it. It makes me extremely happy that my sons have elements and components and integrity
Yeah.
and personality that reflects their father, even though they each have their own unique style and the way that they manifest it. But I truly, truly am blessed to watch them and to see that yes, their father lives on through each of them. My youngest, he's a thespian, and he's always doing acting and singing, and he used to sing with the Philadelphia Boys Choir and
Oh
toured with them
wow.
for many years. And so I watched him every performance that he had after my husband passed away. He always had an article of my husband's clothing, ties, socks, shirt, something, as his way of making sure that his dad was always with him. And I didn't notice it at first. And then when I really got wind of what he was really doing, it warmed my heart, but I didn't want to say anything to him because that was his personal reflection. I didn't want to draw attention to it overly, you know?
Yeah.
And so we were driving to one of his concerts, and he was like, Mom, do you recognize this tie? You know? And I'm like, yeah, I think I have seen that tie before. And he's like, Mom, you know this is Dad's tie. And I'm like, I do know that. And so that's when he confessed that, he's like, Mom, I wear something to Dad's for every concert. And even though I had known it, I acted as if it were new information
Yeah.
to me because I wanted to honor his process. Everyone grieves differently. And so I wanted to honor his process in that. But it really definitely warmed my heart to see how he was honoring his father.
I think that that is beautiful, and it in a couple ways. One, the fact that he wanted to have him close with him, I think is
Hmm.
it makes sense. At that age, to you're doing something major.
Yeah,
You want your dad with you, but the
yeah.
fact too that he found a way to do it that was true to him and that
Hmm.
worked for him. But the fact that you as his mother, you allowed him to, it's like you said, process it in his own way, in his own time, and tell you when he was ready.
Absolutely.
I think that is, I think that shows emotional intelligence. I think it shows respect, and respect of him and his autonomy, and that's beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's why I always told my sons, I'm like, listen, no one can tell you how to grieve.
Yeah,
No one can feel what you're feeling. And so, you have to do what feels comfortable and right for you. No one can dictate that
yeah,
for you. And so, no one can say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Or no one can even tell you that they know how you feel, even though they may have lost their dad as well. They don't know how you feel.
yeah.
And so, honor their process, but also honor yours as well. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say you're raising strong men. I can tell that, or
Thank you.
have
I
raising
had
and
a good
have raised.
example.
But I mean, but that too, though, what you said about everybody's got their own process. I
Yeah.
I shared on my Facebook recently that I started doing this podcast. I've been doing this for almost a year, and I kind of kept it private for a long time. And when I say private, I meant my wife knew, my daughter knew. My daughter
Hmm.
doesn't really know what a podcast is, but every once in a while she would just say, "Hey, how many people listen to your podcast or your
Oh.
thing?" Um, but I finally shared it in on Facebook with my friends and family that I was doing this thing, and I shared some things I learned. But you touched on one of the biggest ones is that everyone processes differently. I
Yeah.
have spoken to musicians who have written music, you know, poets who've written poetry, others
Hmm.
who, and this way finding a way to still feel close to that person that they've lost. I
That's
don't
right.
think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I think some ways are healthier than others. I would say that's a
Hmm.
really healthy way, but
Yeah.
everybody's got their own grieving process that they have to go through.
Absolutely. And the best thing that we can do as people are going through their grieving process is to respect them, their process, and support them
Yeah.
by, whatever means is necessary. I know for me, my mom passed away on my birthday in 2009. And it's bittersweet,
Yeah.
but my mom, she waited. The beauty of it is she was on hospice, and I had moved into her house to care for her, and she literally waited until it was my birthday. She wanted to know every day, what day is it? What day is it? And when we finally got to my birthday, it was like a relief for her. And, she sent me away to go get my hair done, which that was arguable. I'm like, Mom, I don't need my hair done. I'm staying here with you. She's like, No, I want you to go and get your hair done and get pretty tight curls. And I'm like, nobody cares what my hair looks like. I'm going to be in here with you.
Yeah.
She's like, No, no. And so, sure enough, her sending me away to get my hair done was her way to make an escape because, by the time I got back home, she had already passed away. But the beauty of it was that she had, sung happy birthday to me. We had beautiful exchange of words and memories and different things. But the fact that she mustered the strength to wait until my birthday just kind of knit us together in a way that is unbelievable. And I get to celebrate my birthday, but I also get to celebrate her every year.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That is beautiful that she, because I can see it in her head. She just didn't want to miss your birthday. Not that close.
yeah, she didn't want to miss it.
So, And that I think bittersweet makes sense as a way to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about love. At the end of the day,
Yeah,
no matter what we do, everything that we do must be clothed and based in love.
yeah,
My husband modeled that to us as a family. And as a result, we're able to take that solid foundation of love. And even amid our broken hearts and the difficulties, we can move forward because love conquers all.
yeah.
And so we have wonderful memories. We have great examples. And, I have no doubt of the love that my husband had for me or my children. And that now goads us forward in what we need to do.
You can't beat that.
Nope,
I
nothing like it.
I did want to ask another question too.
Yeah.
You mentioned that his passing happened the day before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
What was Thanksgiving like? In years past, and what has it been like since?
So, Thanksgiving in years past for the Hollis family, my husband's the youngest of 11. And so we would gather all together as a family, all of his siblings, their children, grandchildren.
Yeah,
It was always a huge event for Thanksgiving. There was always tons of food, tons of football, just tons of activities, people, and it was just an all day affair. We would just eat, nap, just an ongoing thing. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and so we weren't
yeah,
gathering, and so that was difficult. So we would do Zoom, and everyone would cook on their own, which just quite wasn't the same. And so we had not quite for 2021, we had not resumed in person Thanksgiving celebrations. And so November 2021, Thanksgiving, um, my sister, like I said, had just passed away. And so I said to my husband, we're just going to do like some light fare. It's not going to be that huge Thanksgiving spread. I don't really feel like doing all that cooking anyway. And so we'll
yeah.
just do, some little light cooking. And so my husband that morning, as I had indicated previously, he had ruptured his Achilles. And so he really wasn't very mobile, but he really wanted some breakfast that morning. And so he got up and, I'm from the Philadelphia area. So Scrapple, I don't know if you've even ever heard of Scrapple,
We have
but,
something similar, liver mush in the South.
oh, they call it liver mush?
Yeah, it's not a pretty name, but it's I don't know how you like it, but I've heard that there's similar. I don't know that they're exactly the same, but I like it
Okay.
burnt. I like mine
Yeah.
cooked and
A little
burnt,
crispy.
crispy
Yeah.
with yellow mustard on bread.
Oh wow, I've never had it with yellow mustard, but yeah. So Philadelphia Haberset, is the name brand in this area, and so my husband got up and he wanted some scrapple, some eggs, and some home fried potatoes.
Oh yeah.
And I had told him, babe, I'll cook it for you. No, 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 you can't make it like I can. I'm like, oh, it's a competition now. So I'm like, fine. So he wanted to get up that morning. We helped him to get downstairs and we, empowered him to be able to navigate in the kitchen to cook this breakfast. And so the general rule in Hollisville is when you cook something, you got to clean up after yourself. That
Sure.
those two go hand in hand. And so my husband was a little tired, from doing the meal, so we were willing to make an exception for him. And so I said, hey, you know what? You go sit down in the family room. I'll clean up the kitchen for you. I need to start my Thanksgiving dinner prep anyway. And so he's like, okay, babe, I'm going to go sit down. And so he's talking to me from the family room while I'm in the kitchen and I'm starting to prepare for my Thanksgiving meal, getting my, sweet potatoes out and getting out my collard greens so I can get ready to clean those and, just getting all my stuff prepared.
Yeah.
And so my husband's like, what all are we having? And so I told him, but I didn't mention turkey because my kids and I had already said, I'd already told them I'm not doing a whole lot of cooking. The children preferred ham over turkey anyway. And so I said, okay, we're just going to have the ham and a few other fixings. And my husband's like, what do you mean there's no turkey? And so to know my husband, he, as nice as he was also a traditionalist. And so he just could not fathom that it would be unconscionable for us to not have turkey on Thanksgiving. Like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, it's okay, babe. We'll have a ham, and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
He's like, no, we have to have a turkey. It is Thanksgiving. Like, it's if we don't have it any other day of the year. And so we're having like this little tiff about this turkey. And he's like, babe, just run to the store and get a turkey. I said, you know how hard it is to get a turkey the day before? Are you kidding me? And he's like, no, just go. He's like, just go get a turkey. I believe you're going to find it, and then you can just come back and continue doing what you're doing. I'm like, it's going to be such a waste of food because nobody's really going to eat this turkey. He's like, I'm going to eat it, and that's all that matters. So I'm like, okay. So literally, I run to the market. It's crowded, to say the least. It's the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But amazingly, I found a turkey. It wasn't a huge one, just a nice little turkey breast, which was perfect, for my husband because he's really the only one that was going to eat it. I leave the market, and as I'm getting in my car, my daughter-in-law, she calls me and she says, Mama P, she's like, something's wrong with Poppy. We called my husband Poppy as a grandfather.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, well, he was sitting here in the family room, like you told him, until you got back. And he said he wanted a bottle of water. I went to bring him a bottle of water. And as I'm approaching the family room, he puts his hand on his chest and he puts his head back, his eyes kind of roll back in his head, and he just falls over. I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, I said, is he moving? She's like, no, he's not moving. He's not doing anything. I said, have you called 911? She's like, yes. I'm like, okay. I was like, get on FaceTime. Let me see him. Like, let me just, see what's going on. And so when she showed me my husband's face on the camera, I have to honestly say, I do believe that I was like, I don't think he's with us. Like, his eyes are too fixed and he's not moving. And so I was greatly concerned,
Yeah.
and real nervous. So I'm like, okay, I'm on my way, and so I just like immediately called, like my pastor and like some of my friends to say, hey, I just need you guys to be praying for me. I don't even have the strength to do it for myself right now. And so by the time I got home, my house was a fury of activity. Like, big shout out to first responders and EMTs and the people that do that work. What they do is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I
And so
agree.
here they are in my home, and my husband is on the family room floor, and they're working feverishly, and they're doing everything that they can to try to save him. I see like the mechanical pumps, and they're doing the CPR. And my youngest son at the time was kind of coming in from a half day at school, and he realizes what's going on, and he's like, Mom. I'm like, I know, I know. And so I look at him, and he's constantly looking into the family room, and I'm like, baby, just focus here, trying to keep him situated. And I could just see the nervousness in his eyes. And I said to him, recalling that just a year prior, I had COVID. Our whole household, for the most part, except for two of my kids, had COVID. And literally during COVID, I had a seizure and I stopped breathing. And my husband, I was sitting in the same chair, the same position where he had been sitting, and they laid me out on the same place on the floor in the family room. And my husband was the one that performed CPR on me before the paramedics got to our home. And amazingly, he was able to resuscitate me. When the paramedics got to the home in my situation, I was breathing, but I was unconscious. So they literally took me out of my house, breathing but unconscious, with my children not knowing whether they'd ever, be able to talk to me again or see me again. And so I'm looking at my youngest son, and I can see he's recalling, all of that and looking at his dad. And so I said to him, I said, son, is this how it was when, mommy collapsed? And he looked at me, and for as long as I live, I'll never forget his facial expressions. He just kind of dropped his head and he looked back up at me, and he was like, no, Mom, this is far more intense. And that's when I really knew that my husband was gone. And so the paramedics, they said, we're going to take him to the hospital. And I just said to the woman, I said, please tell me, I said, is he is he breathing? And she's like, ma'am, we really can't give you, I said, no, no, listen, this is my husband of 30 years. I understand the general rules that you guys can't give details, but I need a detail. It's the day before Thanksgiving. This is my husband. I just need to know, is he breathing or not?
Yeah.
And so she said, no, Mrs. Hollis, he's not breathing. She's like, but we're doing everything that we can do. And, can you meet us at the hospital? I said, absolutely. I'll meet you at the hospital. And of course, there's a million things running through my mind because we had just gone through this with my sister where she had collapsed and they found her unresponsive. And so I'm concerned now, okay, how long has he been, without oxygen? And if he's able to be resuscitated, what is his state going to be? And am I going to have to go through another 10 days of, neurological testing that we just had completed with my sister? And so there's a myriad of thoughts that are just
Everything.
running through my mind. And so, I'm like, okay, I need to stop thinking about all that and let me just take whatever moment it's going to be and let it just be that. And so, we got to the hospital and then I waited and waited. It seemed like forever, but then eventually they came. And, when they take you into the conference room, instead of taking you to an actual bedside, you realize, what the outcome is. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know I told you before, but I'll say it again. I'm so sorry to hear that, and
Oh, thank you.
for
I
you
do
and
appreciate
oh yeah, and for you all to have had to go through that. I mean, so close together. I
that. Yeah.
I think the juxtaposition though of hearing how tragic that is with how your family came together so quickly and just
Mhm.
for each other afterwards.
Absolutely.
It
Yeah. Our mantra, like I said, became grace and space. We're navigating new territory. And so I extend grace to you. I give you your space, and you do the same for me. And, we've had some moments where it's like, I don't really want to talk right now. Not a problem, but know that you have support. And, I did, especially with three sons, I was very careful to remind my sons that there's nothing wrong with talking to a therapist. We're very strong in our faith, but yet again, there's professionals that are here on the earth that can help us. And so, by all means, if you need a therapist, if you need someone to talk to, that is nothing to be ashamed of. I raise my hand first to say that I have one. And so, if you need one, by all means, just let me know, especially for my minor child. He couldn't initiate the services himself. My older sons were old enough to be able to initiate those services on their own.
yeah.
But I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. Let's remove that stigma. So,
I'll just say this. I've said this on this show before, and I'll say it again. I am a firm believer that therapy is, whether you've been through something traumatic or not, therapy is a great service. It's a great thing.
yeah,
We
absolutely.
you go to the doctor every year for your physical health. You go to the dentist for your dental health.
Yeah,
Your mental health is just as important.
it really is.
All right, so
Yeah,
thank you for one being that example, and then two sharing that.
absolutely.
For anyone listening, if you think that maybe that's something that, if you're curious about whether or not that would be good for you, please try it. I would highly
Try
recommend it.
it. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, my husband loved food. I'm still not sure how I feel about turkey.
Yeah, I
I don't know if I want to eat it every day to remember him or if I never want to eat it again.
yeah, I can imagine that would sour you on it because we talked a bit. You asked me before we started about the premise of this and the background, and I told you that
Hmm.
I think food's a great way to remember people. Um,
It
I can
is.
understand the negative associations with the turkey though. Um, but you did mention the foods that he loved. Tell me about
Yeah,
some
my
of those
husband
foods.
he loved ribs. Like
Yeah.
he loved to eat some barbecue spare ribs
Oh yeah.
and he loved to eat lasagna. Like those were probably his two favorite dishes
Yeah.
to eat. Now he could also cook a mean salmon. Whew. My husband would get the grill out and he would grill that salmon and he had this special seasoning that he kept under wraps and he would use that and put some of that seasoning and just blacken the salmon. And my kids, like, it was just delicious. Like, we absolutely loved it. So he would make the salmon and he would also make shrimp alfredo. Kids loved when my husband made shrimp alfredo.
I love too that they got to see him doing the helping out with the cooking
Yeah.
too. That's
Oh yeah.
I,
We're an equal opportunity family around here.
as it should be. I
Yes.
I take a lot of pride in the fact that I do a my wife has been extra busy at work lately, so I've been trying to help pitch in and pick up more of the cooking. And look, we haven't all said this out loud, but I think we all know she is the better cook of the two of us. But
Yeah.
Daddy tries his
Generally the
best.
women are.
Hey, but Daddy tries his best, and
That's okay.
I have about a 90% success rate on not screwing up dinner. So
That's
I take
good.
pride I take pride in that.
And that other 10% we just eat out. It's okay.
Yeah, we actually had this last week. I tried to make Salisbury steak last week, which sounds like it'd be the easiest thing in the world. Um,
Hmm.
I should have followed a recipe a little bit more closely. I tried to go off of feeling, and we ended up eating
No.
McDonald's that night. So it's you win some, you lose some. That one,
That's true.
my daughter would say that she won that one, but
She had the Happy Meal. She was fine.
yeah, no, she got the Happy Meal, and I ate a couple Shane burgers, so it worked out. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's one of those you got to laugh a little bit. Tell
Yeah.
me though, you mentioned to me too that you've ordered ribs a couple times, to kind of just I guess remind you of him.
Yeah, I have. Like, a few times when I've gone out with friends or with family since my husband's passing, it is kind of funny because, like, I would order ribs. And so a lot of times my husband and I, we would go on dates, he would not look at the menu. And so because he knew he was mostly getting ribs. And so, I was like, well, do you want to look at the menu? He's like, no, I'm just going to order ribs. And I'm like, are you sure they have ribs? He's like, oh, yeah, everybody sells ribs. And so, I would look at the menu and I wouldn't see ribs, but I wouldn't say anything. And so then the waitress would come and he'd ask for ribs. And she's like, oh, sir, we don't serve ribs. And he's just like, oh, okay. Still not looking at the menu. Well, do you have steak? Like, it was like he had this thing where he just didn't want to look at the menus. And he's like, every restaurant should either have ribs, and if they don't have ribs, they have steak. And then if they don't have steak, then they either have a burger or a salad. So I don't ever need to look at a menu because I'm going to eat one of those four things. So
I can
it
respect
used,
that though.
it
You
used
knew
to
what he
always
wanted.
be so funny. And so one time for date night, I intentionally picked a restaurant that had neither ribs nor steak.
You did this just to
Like, I'm
prove a
going to
point.
force you. Yeah, I'm going to force you to look at the menu.
So did he look at the menu that time, or did he?
He still didn't. Mm-mm. He's
Did
like,
he
"Do you
go
have a
through the questions?
hamburger?" Like, yeah. So yeah, a couple of times on occasion when I would go out to dinner, I would just eat ribs. Like, okay, Martin, I'm remembering you today, and I'm not going to look at the menu, and I'm just going to order ribs. And so that's always a wonderful memory to bring up and to just kind of laugh about
Yeah.
whenever I'm having a meal. To be like, no menu, I know what I want. I'm just gonna get the ribs with the baked potato.
And so I'll ask. I have a statement, but I also have a question. And I guess the question
Hmm.
is: do you intentionally go out saying I'm going to get the ribs, no menu, or is it you got there and thought to yourself like, hey, just something just felt right and it just felt like the right thing to do?
It's been both. Like, one night we were going out with his family, and so it was just kind of like a dinner with his family. And I'm like, okay, I'm honoring Brother Martin tonight, and I'm getting ribs with the baked potato and some iced tea with extra lemon. Like, I didn't even have to think about it. As soon as I get to the table, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
And then there are other times when I would just be out, and as I'm looking at the menu, I would see the ribs and be like, I'm going to order ribs this time.
it just hit you.
So yeah. So sometimes there was intentionality, and then other times it was just monumental in that moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's I guess the statement I was going to make is that it does feel very I don't think cathartic is the word, but it just feels right sometimes. You know, there's something about it's a closeness, right? It feels like you're feeling closer to that person because you're enjoying
Yeah.
something that they enjoyed so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know my husband dessert wise, he loved apple pie a la mode.
Okay, yeah.
He absolutely and of course the pie had to be warm so that the ice cream could melt and drizzle along the sides.
Well, yeah, that's the right way to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. It's like any other way, like what are you doing? Yeah. So there was one time when I was out for dinner and I noticed that they had apple pie a la mode, and I did order that because I wasn't going to get dessert, but there was a group of us, and so we just decided, hey, let's split a dessert, you know. And so I'm like, okay, it has to be the apple pie guys, and they were like, okay, cool. And so I'm like, that we're going to remember Martin in this moment, and so with this one slice of pie and four forks and spoons, we're gonna just divide it up. So yeah, yeah.
That's special though, that that one that you were able to do that. Even what may seem like a small thing, I think can have big impacts. We talked earlier about
Yeah,
how small things they can mean as
yeah,
much as a big thing, but something as small
absolutely.
as just a dish that somebody liked, but the fact too that they were so supportive. And yeah, she wants the apple pie, we're getting the apple pie.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is it is amazing how food is a unifier in that regard.
Yeah.
And so it's very helpful. I can always dial up good memories when I think about food because I remember this is funny too. When my husband and I first got married, I was 21 years old and my husband was 8 years older, so he was 29.
Yeah.
And so I really, I was never really a cook. My dad was a chef in the Navy, and so
Oh wow.
he always cooked for us. And so I can't really say I knew how to cook. I really knew how to cook or anything like that. And so now I'm marrying this man, and he wants to eat, and so I'm trying my best. I'm getting recipes, and I'm cooking all these different meals, and trying to make everything that I think he might like. And so he would come home from work, and he would be like, "Oh, that was really good. That was great." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm doing well. I'm learning. I'm learning. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So I'm doing okay." But yet, like about 2 hours, maybe or so after dinner, my husband would always go into the kitchen and he would get like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Or he would go and grab a bowl of, cornflakes and slice a banana and put it on it. Or, he would make a hot dog and get a can of baked beans. And, I'm like, didn't you like the food I made? Like I'm kind of like wondering, like, was the food good or was the food not good? Like I'm not sure, And, I'm like, he's like, oh no, babe, the food was great. I ate seconds of it. It was wonderful, but I'm a real basic kind of guy. And I just like, hot dogs and baked beans, cereal, peanut butter and jelly. He's like, long as we have that stuff in the house, I'm good. You don't
Yeah.
have to make all those, like super special hard dishes. I'm like, you just made my life 100 times easier because at the time I was in grad school and I'm like, you got to be kidding. So, needless to say, there was never a time in our pantry when you did not find those staples. And sometimes he would come home from work and he'd say, what's for dinner? I'm like, cereal. He's like, perfect.
See, and that's how you know he married you because he loved you, not because he wanted somebody to cook for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I have tons of food memories with my husband. And even I'll tell you this story. It's a food story, then I'll stop. Um, when we were dating, um, I sort of to know my husband's family and my family. They grew up together. So like I'm the youngest of seven. He's the youngest of 11, and the my older siblings and his siblings, they all grew up together. They were, we were all neighbors before I was even born.
Yeah.
And my mom and his mom were really good friends, and my mom used to change my husband's diapers. I mean, like our families are highly integrated. And
Yeah.
so as I got older and my husband's really had a romantic interest in me, he told my parents, and they were like, okay, go ahead, Martin. They were fully in agreement with it. But even though he and I were friends, I was not quite getting the romantic message. I wasn't quite understanding it. And so he was like, she's really smart, but when it comes to romantic things, she's kind of clueless. And so he finally told me, I actually am interested in you romantically. Like you're not getting it. I'm like, wait a minute, you're just like a family friend. Like that doesn't make any sense. And so he was like, well, can we at least try it? So I'm like, okay. So we're on this date, and anyone that knows me knows that I love seafood. And so my husband picked perhaps one of the nicest seafood restaurants in Philadelphia at the
Okay.
time. I think it's closed now. But we had gone, and he's like, you can get anything you want. And of course, I'm completely indecisive because I love all seafood. And so they had the a lump crab meat appetizer, and then they had the shrimp cocktail, and I couldn't decide between the two. And so my husband's like, "Well, get them both." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I'm ordering two appetizers. Then it's time to get my meal. Well, I can't really decide. Do I want the lobster tail? Or do I want the salmon? And he's just like, order both entrees. We can always take a doggy bag home. I'm like, oh, okay. I said, he might be a good person to date after
It's
all,
like, okay.
And so then when it's time for dessert, I couldn't decide between the cheesecake and the strawberry shortcake. They were both, so appealing. And so, of course, I got them both. And then I'm thinking, well, wow, my parents probably would really enjoy this as well. So then we're buying dessert to take home. So, of course, we're leaving the restaurant looking like we've been to the supermarket because we have all this food. And so I kind of knew then that he was definitely a keeper
He was for real.
because he put down a lot of money in that restaurant. We probably fed like six people with all the food we purchased on our date.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's a move though, right there. Just to say, just get both. Just get both.
Yeah, just help yourself. Whatever you want, babe. I'm like, okay. Don't tell me that.
Well, I know you told me that you wrote a memoir.
I did.
Before we jump into that though, because I do want you to talk to us about that before we end. Um,
Okay.
there's one last question I always like to ask my guests before we wrap up because I think it's I don't know how to explain if it's I wouldn't say it's fun to think about, but I think it's special. If you had a chance to have one last meal with them, what would that be?
If I had a chance to have one last moment with him,
One last meal.
oh, one last meal with
Yeah.
him. Wow. I think if I had an opportunity to have one last meal with him, I probably would have some crabs.
Crab.
So yeah, so I went to undergrad in Maryland, and I love blue crabs, snow crabs, all kinds of crabs. And so my husband, although he loves the crab meat, he refused to actually pick the crabs. Like he's like, I'm not. It's too much work. I'll just go buy some jumbo lump crab meat from somewhere. And so that's what we would normally do, like special occasions or whenever he even wanted to do something romantically to surprise me. He would get me the jumbo blue crabs, and he would get me some Alaskan or Dungeness crab
Oh
legs,
wow.
and I would sit and eat them, and he would just talk to me. Because, of course, when you're sitting and eating crabs, it's so easy to talk. And so he wouldn't really eat anything except maybe a small bowl of the lump crab meat, but he enjoyed watching me pick the crabs. He would tease me about it. He's just like, "You getting any meat?"
He just likes being
And
with
he's
you.
like, "How do you do that? It's so much work." But I think if I were to have an opportunity to have another meal with him, I would want it to be a meal like that because I know we would sit and talk
Yeah,
and have a really good time. Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing so much with me today and with the audience. Um, I like I mentioned a moment ago. I know you did write a memoir. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Sure, I would love to talk about that. So, my husband was one who was very intentional about what he did. He was very intentional about what he said. He was very intentional about the things that he did, the associations and the things that he made. Um, he was just very intentional. And so I reflected a lot on my husband. And as I indicated previously, my mom had passed away on my birthday. And so I had started a blog about 3 years ago in memory and in honor of her. And so I decided in 2021 to dedicate my blog to my husband. And so every Monday, I would write, just a short little blog entry and put something on my social media with the hashtag of Martin Mondays, 'cause my husband's name was Martin. And
Yeah.
so I would just write this little story every week. But I'm also a strong believer in learning a life lesson. Like, I don't believe that anything we go through is wasted and doesn't have some type of value in our lives. And so I started writing these little memories of my husband and our relationship, but I would always end them with a question. So, what is the lesson here? What can we glean from what we've, shared in this story?
Yeah.
And so I just started doing that. I would sit down on Sunday nights and, look up to the sky and be like, all right, Brother Martin, what do we want to tell the people tomorrow about our relationship? And it
Yeah.
was very therapeutic for me to just be able to share. Like, even people that knew us, some of the stories I shared were things they've never heard before. And so it was a great way to keep my husband's memory alive and to reflect on him. And so somewhere mid-year, it became kind of obvious that this is kind of a book. People kept saying, "Hey, can you write a book? Can you make this a book? Like, this is so good." Like, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Really, guys? Like, I'm just out here sharing my memories and pouring out my heart. I wasn't really thinking about writing a book."
Yeah.
And so I'm like, "Well, they might be right." And so then I decided to be intentional like my husband and to plan out this book. And so I was doing 52 stories, of course, for the 52 weeks of the year. But I also wanted to commemorate my husband's birthday. So my husband's born in January the 23rd. And so I wanted to make sure that the book was released on his birthday. I wanted to celebrate and have like a book launch and everything on his birthday. And he would have turned 61 this past January. And so I wanted to have 61 stories to just reflect and, his years on earth. And so 52 of the stories are specific to the time that we had with my husband while he was alive. And then the last 9 stories are things and lessons that my family have learned since he has passed away. And so these 61 stories are a memoir of my husband, our relationship, but it's also a pattern and an outline for others, because at the end of the day, all relationships require and necessitate intentional intimacy.
Yeah.
They require vulnerability, and sharing and communication, and selflessness, and just different themes that go through the book are the foundation and the core of all relationships. And so I wanted to create those intimacy moments for people to peer into our relationship, but not just reflect on Martin and Paula, but then to look like, so what is the lesson here? It's not just Martin and Paula's story, it's your story too.
Yeah.
How can you apply this into your life, into your relationships with others? And so I give space for that in the book for people to reflect and not just look at our love story, but to look at their relationships and their love stories with loved ones, with their significant other, with their children, because all of our relationships necessitate intentional intimacy. So that's the name of the book: Intentional Intimacy Lessons in Life, Love, and Relationships. And
Well,
it is available on Amazon. And I would appreciate any support and reviews that you guys would provide. If you just look up Intentional Intimacy, you'll find the book in hardback, softback, and in the Kindle electronic version. So,
that's beautiful. I will be ordering.
thank
I will also make sure to link that out in my show notes. Um,
okay.
so anyone who's reading the comments, you will see the link to that book.
Wow, I appreciate that, Andrew. I do. I just want people to be intentional about their relationships, be intentional about the time they spend with one another. That's one thing. My husband and I, they always say opposites attract. I am the epitome of a multitasker. My husband is a single threaded type of person. And so he always believed in giving the gift of presence. And so if you were in his presence, you had 100% of his attention.
Yeah.
And that's generally not the case with me. I'm kind of doing other things, but I'm a mom, so I can not look at you and still know what's going on, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it used to always be so funny when he would say, "Babe, come sit down next to me and let's watch the news." Okay, are we going to do anything else? No, we're going to sit here and we're going to watch the news, because he would always give the gift of presence, and he was very intentional. And I really think that that's something that's often missing in our interactions and relationships with one another today, like really giving each other our presence and our time and our energy. And my husband taught me that. And I also, in turn, would teach him things like, okay, babe, we're going to go on a tech date, and we're going to sit there, and we're not allowed to say any spoken words, because my husband really didn't text much. So I'm like, okay, we're going to sit here and we're going to text each other the entire time through dinner, so that you can really learn how to text me, because it's not necessary for you to call me 10 times a day or to say, "Babe, I'm on my way home." That's a text message. So we're going to teach you how to text.
I I love that because you're right that how important intentionality is and presence. I
Yes,
think that is a such an important message, especially for relationships. But
yes,
too, the balance there of you teach and bring out something in each other.
yeah,
Because I know my wife and I, I feel like we've both taught and shared so much with one another, and I think that's a hallmark of any good relationship is that you both
absolutely.
obviously you both have to be partners and bring something to the table, but it's not always the big stuff. Sometimes it is, again, it's the little things. That seems to be the theme of this episode. But a
Yes,
little thing like teaching somebody how to text or just sitting down to watch the news. I mean, I I love that so much.
yeah,
Paula,
yeah,
I just
yeah.
want to
My
say
heart,
go ahead.
my heart always warms when I think of my husband, because I have so many loving, caring memories like that.
Yeah.
And if I can encourage your listeners in any way, shape, or form, be intentional in your relationships. We never know. We say here today, gone tomorrow. No, it could be here today and gone today. We were anticipating my husband's retirement, and he's retired in a way that I would not have ever chosen
Yeah.
at that point in life, but I'm thankful that I can reflect on the 30 years we spent together as a married couple and the years we dated. And to be honest, I probably was loved more in those 30 plus years than I probably could have ever been loved, and what some people might ever experience in a lifetime,
Yeah.
because my husband was so intentional, and it really has made a difference in my life and in the lives of my children, and hopefully in my children's children. Hopefully we will continue the legacy.
There are
So,
some things I think that are generational. I spoke with a couple guests a few months ago, and they talked about generational trauma and how that can be a grief process.
yes.
But I think on the other side of this is that generational love, and it's a foundation that's been set. It's clearly it was there for you. It's been there in your marriage. You laid out that example for your children. It sounds like they're going to pass it on to their children. You know,
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think they're passing it along. And um, I didn't talk much about my grandson, but he came up a couple times while you and I were talking. I'm like, shh, gotta be quiet,
that's fine.
But he and my husband had a beautiful relationship, and even still to this day, he remembers my husband. And I mean, he's only 4, but he remembers. And it's amazing. Like last year for Father's Day, he was 3, he hadn't turned 4 yet. And of all the Sundays, we're going to church, he decides on Father's Day morning that he wants to wear Poppy's hat. He's never asked to wear a hat before. He's never worn a hat before, but here it is Father's Day, and he wants to wear Poppy's fedora to church with his shorts and sneakers on. So we said, of course, you can wear Poppy's hat,
Yeah.
to church. He's never asked again to wear any hats. And it was like, how did he know that it was Father's Day? Like, it was just so endearing, the fact that on Father's Day, he asked to wear one of Poppy's hats. And he was just like, Poppy's in heaven, but I'm going to wear Poppy's hat. And I mean, it just warmed all of our hearts, like, oh my God, like he still remembers, Poppy. And of all days and all Sundays for him to pick to wear one of his fedoras to church, it was a beautiful thing. And like you said, for me, it represents legacy. And there's a proverb, there's a psalm that says, a good man will leave an inheritance for his children and his children's children. And that inheritance is not all financial. Now, the financial is important. Don't get me wrong, because nobody wants a broke, busted, and disgusted family. However, you've got to leave more than just material
Yeah.
legacy. And so, yeah, if the legacy of love is the legacy that Team Hollis is perpetuating, then I'm all for it.
I don't think it could get any better than that.
Thank you, Andrew.
Paula, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for talking about them. I love doing this podcast because I get to talk to amazing people. This has been one of the most special interviews I think I've done.
Oh,
I say that with no hyperbole. You brought tears to my eyes several times, and I just want to say thank you.
wow. Well, I really love what you're doing, Andrew. And I'm so honored and humbled to be a guest on your broadcast. I really hope your sponsorship and your viewership expands considerably, because I can just totally sense your heart in all that you're saying. You definitely have intentionality and empathy, and you really are just a strong personality for this work. And I'm so glad that you started it, in memory of your grandfather. And I truly hope that it resonates and blesses others, because the concepts that you have, food is a comfort,
Yeah.
and, aligning our comfort and grief and food together, there's a lot of memories that we can share when you think about family dinner and, sitting down and sharing and making memories. That's the core. And so much of that is lost nowadays. So many families don't sit down and have dinner together, and I remember that when I married my husband, we went to my in-laws every Sunday for dinner.
It's there is some
Yeah.
the act of breaking bread with family and friends and people you care about. I think is important. I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be necessarily around a dinner table. I'll never judge somebody like we eat on the couch, we eat on the floor. I think eating, just the act of eating together, is important, and
Yeah.
I'd love getting to share a meal with my wife and my daughter. There's nothing better.
That's awesome. Blessings to you and your family, Andrew. Thanks so much again for having me.
Thank you so much for being on.
Take care.
You too. Thank you to Paula for joining me today. Honestly, I found myself tearing up multiple times throughout the course of this conversation. Paula, whenever I say that you were such a delight to have on, I mean that with everything I have. I enjoyed speaking with you so much. To the audience, I hope you enjoyed talking with her as well. I also hope that you'll read her book, Intentional Intimacy. I'm going to be putting a link to that in the show notes for you to go check out. I've said it before when I've had authors on. I'll say it again. I don't do any type of ad revenue or anything like that from those links. These are not affiliate links. 100% of what you're spending there is going to the person who wrote it. I'm not trying to take anything from that. So please know, full transparency, I don't benefit from it, but I would love it if you would go buy her book, support her, read that, and take that into your own life. You also can subscribe to Our Last Meal wherever you're listening or listen to podcasts. And I said it up top, I'll say it again. I would love if you take the time to rate and review and just help other people find this podcast. I'd also love if you'd follow Our Last Meal on social media, so Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, at Our Last Meal Pod, or go to ourlastmeal.com. And if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can reach out by clicking the Share Your Story button at the top of the page. You can also email ourlastmealpod@gmail.com. Reach out to me on social media, however you want to do it. I'd love to talk with you. So until next time, I'm going to sign off and tell you please take care of yourselves and go share a meal with someone you care about.